Hi, I'm not doing this whole intro again. This is the second video in my Final Fantasy blind review video essay series. Much like how when playing these games they have required reading, it is also expected you have seen the previous videos as I will reference them here and there. However, for those of you who don't care, spoiler warning for Final Fantasy 1, even though there isn't much to spoil, and 2, of course. Now, on with the video. Final Fantasy II was released in December 1988 for the NES, nearly a year to the day from FF1's original release date. Once again, this game was directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, with Nobuo Uematsu composing the soundtrack. This time, we also got an additional figurehead on the work, Yoshitaka Amano, who designed the characters for the title as well as made many illustrations which you might have seen. However, my history lesson doesn't end here. For one, Final Fantasy II was not originally out in the West, and if you look for a copy, you'll instead find an FF2 for the Super Nintendo, which is actually just Final Fantasy IV. This is pretty disappointing, but I will get to why later on. Lastly, I want to talk specifically about the version I'm playing and the music you hear in the background. For this video, I will be playing the Pixel Remaster as I did with FF1 with the same modified fonts. The main thing I want to focus on is how the Pixel Remaster actually removed a bit of character from the original FF2, namely from the prelude. You see, the prelude in FF1 was a very simple track with not that much going on, and that was perfectly okay. However, for FF2, the prelude was changed slightly to give it a bit of character for the sequel. To illustrate this difference, I'll play the original NES versions back to back. Fairly different, right? Well, if you play the Pixel Remaster, unfortunately that character is lost due to just being an orchestra arrangement that is decently similar to the first. Anyway, nitpick over. Final Fantasy II starts off much different from the first, not letting you choose anything about your party except their names. However, they already have names given which are the canonical names. From now on, I will not be changing any names in the entire franchise due to this. Something else to talk about is their designs, specifically Firion. I must say that out of all the characters in this game, Firion has one of the most striking and unique designs, which helps him stand out amongst the crowd. Already, Amano is flexing his stuff, but I digress. With our party of Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon, we set off to see what Final Fantasy II has in store for us. Once again, a cutscene plays that mostly isn't in the original, but I'll be damned if I don't say I really like this one. FF1's intro cutscene was bare bones and really didn't give much context, whereas FF2's immediately shows off the destruction laid out by the Palamecian Empire and their leader, simply called the Emperor. In an attempt to fight back against the Emperor, the Kingdom of Fynn tries to call their army, but before they can, the Empire takes over Fynn and the castle. The Princess of Fynn flees to Altair along with any survivors from the attack. However, our party isn't so fortunate. Immediately, we are thrust into a battle in the woods and introduced to the battle system of Final Fantasy II. Once again, it's completely turn-based, with commands you can give your party. A new command we can give this time around is row, which moves a party member either into the front row or the back depending on where they currently are. Front row party members can attack with melee weapons that are what we are used to, but back row members are new. They can only cast magic, or use long-range attacks such as bows. They take less damage from enemies and more easily avoid attacks as well. On the magic front, we also have an MP bar replacing the tiered cast system from FF1. And lastly, the battle theme, which is so much better than FF1's. It has a lot more variety in sound and instruments and just much better. For now, that's all the changes I'll go over. Now, let's give these Black Knights their comeuppance, shall we? Oh fuck. I'll admit, when this happened, I was caught so off guard I could do nothing but sit in awe. Already, Final Fantasy II is showing off muscles the first game could only dream of. In roughly the first 5 minutes, we've infinitely more story than FF1, new mechanics, a better battle theme, and even scripted deaths? Color me impressed because holy hell was I not expecting such a bombastic intro to an NES title. Firion heads into the hall to meet with the rest of the party after being revived, but we are one member short. Maria's brother, Leon, is missing. Talking to the princess, she tells us that the Empire has taken citizens hostage in Fynn, and that Leon might be there. Before we go, she tells us the rebel army's password, Wild Rose. Again, another new system. In this game, you can actually talk to NPCs. You can learn passwords from NPCs and then ask about those specific things to any NPC you see in the game. Not everyone will give you information about any random password, but specific ones will give you clues and hints on how you should progress throughout the game, so keep them in mind. We head outside of the base and into the town to buy some equipment for our 3-man party, and this is when shit gets interesting. Unlike Final Fantasy 1, where everyone has a very specific role to play, everyone in FF2 is moldable into whatever form you need. Want 4 healers? Sure. Need Fury into multi-class as both the tank and black mage? Consider it done. No matter what you get, armor, weapons, and even spells, everything can be used by everyone. I'll dig a bit deeper into this in a bit, but for now, know I really like this system. With the knowledge that Leon is held captive, we begin our journey towards Finn, and of course, along the way, we enter a random encounter. As I've already gone over the battle system, there isn't much to say except that leveling's gone. You heard me right, leveling is gone. You might ask then, how do I improve my stats? Good question. The answer is battling. Everything you do in battle has a direct correlation to your stats. You whack an enemy with a sword? Well, your strength will go up and your ability to use swords will also go up. Taking damage gives you more HP, spending mana gives you more MP, and in fact, using spells is the only way to improve said spells. I don't mean like the jump from Thunder to Thundara and then to Thundaga, I mean literally. The damage of the spell goes up as you level it. So instead of getting Thundara, you get Thunder 5 or whatever. With this shift in spells, there was also a need to rebalance singular and multi-target spells. In Final Fantasy II, every spell is both singular and multi-target. By pressing a button, you can target the entire enemy party, at the penalty of reduced damage and accuracy. Unfortunately, this ends up making multicast magic kind of pitiful. You never deal enough damage with a multicast, even if you have some of the best spells in the game. And this becomes a bit of a problem later on, but I digress. Arriving at Finn, we sneak around so the guards don't catch us. P.S. They one-shot you. The party arrives at the tavern in Finn and talks to the bartender, who upon hearing the password tells us to go talk to a wounded soldier hidden behind a secret passage in the wall. Talking to the soldier, he tells us he's the Prince of Kashuan, and this is when the unthinkable happens. He tells your party a couple of things, gives you his ring to take care of, and then collapses. That's right. A man just died, and the party has to live on to tell his dying wishes. And you know what? This might be my favorite part of Final Fantasy II. Not because he is a well-known character or because what he says profoundly impacts the party, but because his death sets in stone that this game is boldly different from Final Fantasy I. Characters can die. Maybe next it'll be someone you know. Maybe even someone you like. And I love it. The party heads back to Altair and shows the ring to the princess and tells of Scott's death. She says to keep it and instead asks the party if they could help aid the rebel army. Of course, we oblige, and she asks us to go find a source of mithril so that the rebel army can craft better weapons and armor. Before we go, she also tells us to take Minwu, the healer who revived us at the beginning of the game, into our party as we travel to Salamand to meet with Yosef, the man who can tell us information on how to get some mithril. And just like that, we have a party of 4 and are ready to begin the game proper. Let's jam. Final Fantasy II starts out with a bang of an intro, but the question remains, can it carry this hype all the way through? Well, the answer is yes and no. Let's go back to that 4th party member to start. We got Min Sheesh, a white mage who has way better stats than your low-income asses and 16 spells, some of which are up to level 7? He is more than enough to carry the party all the way to Salamand and even through most of the first dungeon, Semet Falls. For a first dungeon, Semet Falls isn't too hard. Most of the enemies feel right in line with what you should have been fighting up to this point. It has a comfortable length and most importantly introduces you to another thing that I absolutely love about this game, recurring characters. Paul from the rebel town of Altair makes an appearance. Paul is a thief by trade working under the rebel army, stealing as much as he can from the Empire. He tried to take the opportunity to steal the mithril from the mine to save the party some trouble, but ended up getting caught alongside a bunch of citizens from Salamand who were forced to work in the mine. Seeing him was a really cool moment, because it got me going, yo wait, that's that one dude I saw at the beginning of the game, which is such a fulfilling moment compared to FF1's stand-in-place NPCs who never ever moved or ever actually became real characters. This is a real character. This is someone who I know I will see again. There isn't really a boss for Semet Falls, so we get the mithril and get out of there. Giving the mithril to the princess, we get our next task. to destroy the Empire's warship, the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought isn't currently ready to be taken into the skies and is being held near the city of Bafsk. Once we reach the city, we once again put that password system to work and talk to a spy in the Empire. He ushers us into the sewers down below Bafsk, which is technically our second dungeon, even if it is pretty short. I want to give a quick shout out to the balloon enemies that are introduced here, which self-destruct and pop your team's HP like, well, balloons. Hate these guys and always avoid them, which, by the way, flee works quite well in this game compared to FF1. Just thought I should mention that. We make it to the end of the dungeon, and once again, we don't have a proper boss. The enemy mocks us for being too late and forces us to watch as the Dreadnought takes off and begins its assault. The Dreadnought destroys the towns of Poft, Paloom, and Altair, our home base. Heading to these towns, you can visibly see the damage, and they never get repaired. It's both a shame and great. The game never forgets the damage that is caused by this incident, and that is just so cool. We head back to Altair, and the town is quite distraught by the destruction. The party ends up parting ways with Minwu as he needs to take care of the king. Before we leave to continue our quest, Minwu gives us some info on Sid, the owner of the local airship which has been flying around the map this whole time. And God, I love the fact that you can see the airship moving around as you play. It's such an excellent way to introduce it to you prior to actually being told about it. Sid's home base is the Tavern in Poft, which, by the way, everyone abandoned since they were terrified of dying. Sid, on the other hand, tells you to blow up the engine to bring the Dreadnought down through the use of Sunfire. I'll admit, it's kind of annoying that Sid isn't willing to tell you how to get Sunfire, so you have to go all the way back to Altair. The king tells us that, hey, we need the goddess's bell to get Egil's torch so we can get the Sunfire and blow the Dreadnought sky high. Alright, between you and me, I'm gonna stop retelling the story beat by beat, because you know what? It's taking too damn long, and I think y'all understand my point with all this, right? The story exists, and that's so much more than Final Fantasy I had in its entirety. I won't say the story is incredible, far from it, but it's enough to not only satisfy me, but made me genuinely care enough to play the game through. The recurring characters, the new party members, this game made me care. So, for one last hip hip hurrah for the story that made me care, I will quickly list out all of the remaining events in the story that were interesting to me or caught me off guard. Yosa's death, Empire capturing the princess and the Dreadnought, blowing up the Dreadnought, getting the pirate ship, learning of the Dragoon, saving the last Wyvern egg, Empire capturing the princess again, retaking Finn, getting swallowed by the Leviathan, meeting the last Dragoon, Minwu's death, getting the ultimate tone, hatching the last Wyvern egg, entering the Cyclone dungeon, killing the Emperor, the Dark Knight taking over the Palamecian Empire, Sid giving the airship in his dying breath, the Empire coming back from hell, Riker the Dragoon sacrificing himself for the party, and finally entering hell itself to kill the Emperor. Woo! Yeah, the story is long, with tons of ups and downs, and as I said, it's actually pretty good. Now, for a brief overview of a couple dungeons I skipped. First off, the Dreadnought dungeon. The party enters the Dreadnought in hopes of both saving the princess and destroying the ship itself. By the way, don't be like me and end up at the very bottom of the Dreadnought before saving the princess. You'll have to go all the way back up to the very top to save her. Other than that minor hiccup, decent dungeon with a satisfying as hell conclusion. Next, the Mysidian Tower, a giant dungeon that spans 10 floors that's divided into multiple parts. A fire area, an ice area, and a thunder area. Each has a couple floors with elemental tiles that'll hurt your party, followed by an elemental giant mini-boss. Each mini-boss is harder than the last one, with the thunder one being fairly difficult and technically the final boss of the dungeon. And of course, the dungeon ends with the death of Minwu and the gaining of the Ultimate Tome.
Small note, please, don't put the Ultimate Tome on someone outside of the main three. R.I.P. Ultimate Tome. You will be missed.
Lastly, the final dungeon of the game, and arguably the coolest and best, Pandemonium. Much like FF1's Chaos Shrine, Pandemonium is the best looking, bar none. The pink and blue Palace of Hell just oozes uniqueness. And the OST? My God! Like, dude, a choir? Holy! The dungeon is 10 floors long, with pretty much no mini-bosses unless you decide to open a chest, in which case, good fucking luck. There is exactly one mandatory encounter on floor 8, but as I found out, it's a pushover. And finally, on floor 10, you find him, the Emperor, powered up from his time in hell. His design is absolutely awesome. The fight against him is honestly a bit disappointing. For one, his magic spells are all group cast, which means he will literally cast a meteor to slam you, and guess what? 300 damage to each party member. But then he will smack one of your dudes and suddenly, blam, 3,000 damage. Which, by the way, he vampire heals. And also, his defense is stupidly high. A level 10 on a weapon can barely deal any damage to him at all, unless it's the best weapon in the game. Or at least all of this was until on a desperate attempt, I decided to throw on the blood sword. And let me tell you, this should not be how this works. The Emperor died in 2 turns. 2 fucking turns. What? The blood sword is a late game item that is completely missable, but vampire heals you on hit. But more than that, deals a percentage-based damage to enemies. That means the higher the health pool, the higher the damage. Yeah. I know I was hoping for easier than chaos, but holy shit, I was not expecting a pushover. But with that, I guess that's all she wrote. It's time I address the elephant in the room. Final Fantasy II is considered to be hands down the worst game in the entire franchise by nearly everyone. No matter where I went or who I talked to, I heard nothing but spite for this game. Going in, this made me very biased, as I thought for sure I would absolutely hate the game and everything it does. Hell, I even made a thumbnail and title for the video I was going to make. However, if you've made it this far, then you might wonder, Plandiss, how do you feel about the game? After everything you said, it sounds like you liked it, right? And you know what? I did. In fact, I can't even understand the hate this game gets at all. Final Fantasy II improves on everything that Final Fantasy I started and makes drastic changes that shook up the gameplay in a good way. For one, the world design of Final Fantasy II is very non-linear, much like Final Fantasy I, but it gets away with it due to the quest design being so much better. Don't get me wrong, you are still gate-kept from areas via enemies being overpowered, but that isn't nearly as much of a problem since you always know where you are going. The game always pokes and prods you into finding the right path, whether that's because you can actually ask directions from the NPCs or because the world design facilitates genuine landmarks. On top of that, the game doesn't change the pace as quickly as Final Fantasy I. You don't get your own boat until after blowing up the Dreadnought, and you don't get the airship until after killing the Emperor, mere hours before the end of the game. And on top of all this, the game has the gall to level up the entire world after you complete the Mycetian Tower, so now both the land and seas will have battles at your current level. Speaking of levels, we have got to talk grinding, which was the most serious issue in Final Fantasy I. So, is it as bad here? Not quite. Grinding in Final Fantasy I was bad because there was zero thought in the matter. You simply entered a random encounter and did the same thing every time regardless of the enemy. That isn't the case in Final Fantasy II. Stats and spells require you to do specific things in battle to level them. This means that each battle, even while grinding, requires some level of thought behind your actions. I never actually got bored or annoyed while grinding because of this, and it helped that I rarely had to grind because of the game's great pacing. Finally, to top this all off, I want to bring it back to the beginning, when I mentioned how it was a shame this game never came to the West and why. Obviously, the fact that Final Fantasy II has a complete set of characters and story is a good enough reason, but I think the most important is the elements it introduced into the series that became staples. The best example of which is Cid, the owner of the airship. If you didn't already know, Cid is not a one-time character from only Final Fantasy II, but is a reoccurring character throughout the entire Final Fantasy franchise. In nearly every game, he appears in some fashion, usually as the owner of some sort of airship that the party will acquire at some point. Easily the most recognizable of the Cids is of course Cid Highwind from Final Fantasy VII. And Cid isn't the only staple that originated in 2. We also got introduced to the Dragoons, one of the most iconic jobs in the franchise, which is well known for being the poster child for Final Fantasy IV. And last but certainly not least, we got Chocobos in Final Fantasy II. Fucking Chocobos! Not only does this game introduce Chocobos, which are easily the most well-known creature from the Final Fantasy franchise, it also gives them their iconic music, which has also remained a series staple. Final Fantasy I gave us the namesake, the prelude, and the foundation for combat. Final Fantasy II gave us the structure of not only story, but characters and ideas that future titles would only enhance given time. If liking Final Fantasy II is wrong, then I don't want to be right. If you watched this far, first of all, thank you. I mean it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it for the other Final Fantasy games, then please subscribe. If you want to watch me actually play through these games, then you can follow me on Twitch, where I will be streaming the rest in the future. And of course, if you want to support my endeavors on making video essay content, then it would mean so much if you could chuck a few bucks my way on Patreon, alongside Nicholas River James Garcia Jones and Hiroshima. Hope to see y'all next time when I cover the last of the NES FF trilogy.